We ran the numbers. 17 simulations. 42 strategic models. Every single one returned the same result: estimated ground resistance negligible. Projected pacification window 11 days. 11 days. That's what our best minds gave us. 11 days to break a civilization, plant our flag in their dirt, and move on to the next entry in the conquest ledger. On day 2, we stopped laughing. On day 5, we stopped sleeping. On day 9, my commanding officer, a decorated war architect who had overseen the subjugation of 4 sentient species, sat across from me in the dark of the command module, stared at nothing, and said words I had never once heard in 23 years of service. "I don't understand what I'm looking at. This is not a story about how humanity defeated us." I'm not sure defeated is even the right word for what happened. Defeated implies a contest between comparable things. Implies 2 forces meeting on a field and 1 yielding. What happened on Earth was something else entirely. What happened on Earth was the moment we realized we had not come to conquer a civilization. We had knocked on the door of something very old, very patient, and extraordinarily annoyed. I kept a log. My superiors told me to stop. I didn't stop. What follows is that log. The mud here smells wrong. I don't know how else to record it. I've set foot on 11 different planets across 6 star systems, and mud, broadly, smells like mud, organic rot, mineral brine, the general complaint of compressed earth told to hold something it doesn't want to hold. But this mud smells like it's angry. Like something in the soil has a grievance and chose this particular moment to share it with my olfactory system. Sub-Commander Vreth would tell me I'm anthropomorphizing. Vreth says that constantly. It's become his nervous habit. Every time someone on the landing team says something he considers too emotionally loaded, he pinches the ridge of his second eyelid and mutters, "You're anthropomorphizing again, Cellos." I keep a running tally in my log. We're at 43. For the record, 43. I'm recording Officer Cellos of the 14th Forward Assessment Unit, Keth Expeditionary Force. My job is to document. That's the entire job. I walk behind the advanced scouts, I observe, and I put words to what I see so that the fleet commanders orbiting this wet, aggressively scented rock can make informed tactical decisions without ever having to smell anything. I have held this position for 9 years. In 9 years I have documented the subjugation of 3 inhabited worlds. I have written 17 operational assessments, 42 subsidiary reports, and 1 personal grievance filed against a logistics officer who repeatedly ordered the wrong nutrient blocks. He kept sending fermented when I specifically requested dried, and I will be processing that betrayal for some time. I tell you this so you understand, I am not easily surprised. The first human we encountered surprised me. It happened at hour 3, which is to say roughly 30 rotational units after the forward landers touched down on the flat river valley the fleet cartographers had designated as optimal for initial ground establishment. The valley was wide, the soil was, as noted, aggressively scented, and the local vegetation grew in enormous tangled mats that the advance scouts had been cutting through with field blades for 2 hours before someone noticed we had company. Private Uthdean noticed first. I know this because Uthdean is a young soldier who has not yet learned to modulate his reaction volume, and his voice at maximum carries through approximately 60 units of open terrain. What he said, specifically, was, "There's something in the tall plants and it's been watching us for a very long time." The advance line froze. I looked up from my log. There, at the edge of the vegetation wall, still as stone, crouched in the particular boneless fold of something that had been staying very, very still on purpose, was a human. I want to be precise about what I observed, because later there will be disagreement about this, and I want my log to be the record that settles it. The human was not, at first glance, alarming. It was smaller than I'd expected from the pre-contact survey data, roughly 1.7 units tall, bilateral symmetry, soft-looking skin in a shade that fell somewhere between the red-brown of river clay and the pale gray of dried bone. It was wearing a layered garment system, various shades of the local vegetation, I realized, with a slightly delayed horror, and it had its face smeared in dark, irregular patterns that also matched the local vegetation. It was holding a long tubular weapon across its body. What I actually noticed, the thing that made me stop writing mid-sentence and just look, was that it wasn't alarmed. We had 40 soldiers in a landing formation, 3 assault vehicles, and 2 heavy mount weapons deployed in a half circle in front of it. The vegetation had been cut back to clear lines of sight. We were, by any reasonable military assessment, an overwhelming display of force. The human looked at all of this the way you might look at a traffic delay. Annoyed. Inconvenienced. Doing the math on how long this was going to take. Then, it raised one hand slowly, palm out, in a gesture our Xenolinguistics package translated as stop or wait, and pressed something on a small device attached to its wrist. Sub-Commander Vreth ordered the advance line to hold. We waited. 40 seconds passed. I counted. 41. 42. The human lowered its hand, nodded once, entirely to itself, as if confirming something it had suspected, and then turned sideways and walked back into the vegetation and was gone. Just gone. Vreth was looking at the space where it had been. I was looking at Vreth. What, said Private Uthdim, at maximum volume, was that? Vreth pinched his second eyelid. Don't anthropomorphize, he said, but his voice had a quality I hadn't heard from him before. Something thin and uncertain, like a structure that had taken a hit it wasn't showing yet. I wrote, first contact with local species. Individual displayed no fear response. Withdrew on own terms. No threat assessment possible, insufficient data. I paused. Then, I wrote, note, insufficient data is not the same as absence of threat. Day 1. Hour 11. The forward camp was established by hour 7. Standard configuration, perimeter sensors, elevated observation posts, centralized command module, the usual infrastructure of an operation that expected to be packing up within a week and a half. By hour 11 we'd had 4 more sightings. Always at the edges. Always at distance. Always the same pattern, figure in the vegetation, absolutely still, watching. Then, when we turned to look directly, gone. Never the same individual twice. Or at least, never the same clothing configuration twice, which amounts to the same thing in terms of reconnaissance value. Logistics Officer Peth, who is new to ground operations and has opinions about everything, suggested they were scouts from a nearby population center, assessing our position for a potential counterattack. I wrote that down. I also wrote, Peth has been on one previous planetary operation and that operation was a mining claim dispute on an uninhabited rock. Weigh assessment accordingly. What I did not write what I thought, instead, standing at the sensor perimeter at hour 11 watching the vegetation move in ways the local wind didn't fully account for, was that these weren't scouts collecting information to bring back somewhere. They already had what they needed. They were deciding something. I'm not sure how I knew that. Vreth would tell me I was anthropomorphizing. 44. Day 2. Hour 6. Incident at Sensor Post 3. Let me tell you what humans do with razor wire. For context, razor wire is a perimeter deterrent. Coiled high-tension filament with cutting edges deployed at approximately ankle to midsection height around the base of a defensive installation. Its purpose is to slow down any entity attempting to cross the perimeter on foot, making them visible and vulnerable while they disentangle. The filament edges are not immediately lethal, but they are unpleasant in a specific, attention-getting way, and the psychological deterrent value is considered high across most known species. There is something about the visual of the coiled, waiting sharpness that most cognition systems read as do not approach. At hour 6 of day 2, Sensor Post 3's alert system triggered. I was in the command module. I made it to Post 3 in 40 seconds, I'm faster than I look, and found 2 soldiers staring at the outer perimeter. The razor wire had been cut. Not breached. Not crashed through. Cut. Clean parallel incisions, spaced in a pattern that suggested calculation rather than urgency, creating a gap exactly wide enough for a single figure to pass through upright without touching the remaining wire on either side. There was no one on the other side of the gap. There was no one inside the perimeter who shouldn't be. But, directly in the center of the gap, placed with what I can only describe as deliberate neatness, was a small cylindrical device, one of our own sensor casings. Not destroyed. Not disassembled. Taken from somewhere along the perimeter line and relocated here, to the center of the gap, like a note left on a table. Like, I was here. Like, I could have done more. Private Ufdim, who had somehow arrived before me, said, "Did it just break into our camp to let us know it could break into our camp?" I wrote, "Perimeter breached at post 3. No hostile action taken. Object displacement suggests communication intent. Possibly a demonstration rather than an incursion." Then, I wrote, "Demonstration of what, exactly, remains the question." Then, I underlined it. I don't usually underline things in my logs. Vreth arrived 4 minutes later, looked at the gap, looked at the sensor casing sitting in the middle of it, and said nothing for a very long time. Then, triple the perimeter sensors. Add a secondary line. And, somebody wake up the Xenolinguistics team. He didn't say don't anthropomorphize. I wrote, Day 2, Hour 6. Vreth count, still 44. Day 2. Hour 19. The Xenolinguistics team determined, with a confidence level they described as moderate with high caveat, that the gesture the first human had made, palm out, fingers up, carried the same semantic weight across multiple regional languages on this planet. Stop. Wait. I'm not finished yet. Not surrender. Not greeting. Not I acknowledge your presence. I'm not finished yet. I sat with that for a while. The Xenolinguistics lead, a nervous specialist named Orvish who had been assigned to this mission 2 weeks before departure and had not fully adjusted to ground conditions, evidenced by the fact that she flinched at every large noise and there were a lot of large noises, told me this was almost certainly a coincidence of gesture mapping, that hand signal universality across a species didn't necessarily imply unified intent. I told her I had 23 years of field documentation experience and that in my experience, when something feels like a message, it usually is. She said, "That's not a rigorous analytical framework." I said, "Neither is explaining away evidence because it's inconvenient." We did not get along after that. Which is fine. I have my log. Day 3. Hour 2. The first engagement. The third assault column pushed 7 kilometers south toward what the cartographic data identified as a regional population center, one of the larger ones, according to our pre-contact survey, with a population estimate somewhere north of 400,000 individuals and what appeared from orbital imaging to be significant infrastructure. Roads. Supply lines. Production facilities. The kind of target that, on the 2 previous worlds I documented, would typically produce either organized military resistance or rapid civilian capitulation, depending on how well their defense systems had been maintained. What it produced here was neither. The third assault column's lead vehicles entered the first ring of structures, low residential buildings, narrow roadways, the general architecture of a place that had existed for a long time and been repaired more than it had been replaced, and found it empty. Not evacuated empty. Not panicked empty. Organized empty. The kind of empty that has empty vehicles parked in empty lots and empty containers stacked neatly inside empty doorways. The kind of empty where the power was still running in some facilities and not others, and the ones where it was still running were not the residences. Peth said, "They fled." I wrote, "Population center vacated prior to engagement." No evidence of rapid departure, significant material goods remain in place, suggesting planned withdrawal rather than panic response. Query, where did 400,000 individuals go, and how did they do it without our orbital surveillance detecting mass movement? The column's ground commander, a tight-structured officer named Ver with a reputation for thorough work, spent 3 hours in the empty city before filing his initial assessment. His assessment, the city had not been vacated in response to our arrival. The city had been vacated before we arrived. The sensor post breach was on day 2. We'd been on the ground less than 36 hours. Which meant the city had started moving before the first sensor was tripped. Before the breach. Before any confirmation of our ground presence. Ver's assessment contained a line I kept returning to. They weren't reacting to us. They were already prepared for us. Day 3. Hour 14. The recording. Someone found a device in the empty city. A small screen-based communication unit, local manufacture, placed in what appeared to be a centrally located public space, a large open square with ornamental plantings around the edges and several permanent structures arranged to face inward, like they were designed for gatherings. The device was running on a loop. Our translation systems needed 40 minutes to produce a working interpretation. What they gave us was imperfect idiom fragmentation, syntactic gaps, but the core content was legible. The recording was a single individual. Middle age, by the local markers slightly weathered, the kind of face that has spent time outdoors doing physical things. She was seated, and she was talking directly into the recording device, and her effect was, "This is my professional assessment," entirely unbothered. Not brave unbothered. Not performing calm while actually terrified unbothered. The real kind. The kind that comes from having made a decision and being at peace with it. The gist of what she said, in our translation team's rendering, was approximately this: we've moved the people who need to be moved. What you're walking into isn't a city. It's a delay. We know you know that. We're saying it anyway so there are no misunderstandings about what this is. Then, she said something our translation team rendered as, "You've been reading the planet wrong." That's understandable. We've had a lot of practice making sure of it. Then, and this is the part I've returned to at least a dozen times since, she looked directly into the recording device, paused for a very specific beat, and said, "Take your time. We've got some." The recording ended. I played it 4 times. On the 4th time, I noticed something I'd missed on the first 3. In the background of the recording, slightly out of focus, there was a window. Through the window, before the feed cut out, you could just make out the edge of a vehicle departing. The recording was made as they were leaving. She wasn't speaking to us from some distant safe location. She sat in the square, made the recording, and then got up and walked out. Last one to leave. Light off. Door closed. I didn't write anything for 40 minutes after that. Then, I wrote, Day 3. They have protocol. They have patience. They have a sense of humor about it. Query, are these the same people, or do all of them know how to do this? Vreth read my log entry, said nothing, and then went to find Ver. Day 4. Hour 8. Contact. The third column found humans on day 4. Actual, present, armed, and in contact humans, not disappearing into vegetation humans or recording device humans or cutwire and leave a note humans. This sounds like progress. I want to be precise, it was not progress. What the third column found, 7 kilometers east of the empty city in a stretch of dense secondary forest, was a unit of approximately 30 individuals in full concealment. The column found them because the column walked into a position the unit had prepared. Not ambushed, the humans let the lead elements pass, waited until the middle of the column's formation was in the prepared position, and then made contact. By made contact I mean, opened a very precisely targeted exchange of fire that disabled the column's 2 forward vehicles, the communications relay unit, and the column's ability to turn around quickly, while damaging nothing that would actually kill anyone. Ver filed his engagement report with a tone I would characterize as a man choosing every word carefully to avoid saying what he actually thought. What he actually thought, this is inference from the raw sensor data I reviewed, was that the 30 humans had positioned themselves to demonstrate maximum operational disruption while minimizing lethal escalation. They had specifically not shot the soldiers. They had shot the machinery. 3 of Ver's soldiers sustained minor injuries from debris, not direct fire. The human unit then withdrew. Complete and confirmed withdrawal. No pursuit possible due to the disabled forward vehicles and the terrain, which was, according to Ver's report, optimized for this exact type of movement by a force that knows it. I wrote, Day 4. They chose the shape of this contact. We did not. Query, on our previous 3 planetary operations, how many times did the defending force choose the shape of initial contact? The answer was 0. The defending force had always responded to our shape. I didn't write what that meant. I let the question sit there. Day 4. Hour 22. I should tell you about the mud. I know I mentioned it at the beginning of this log and I know it seems like a strange thing to return to, but the mud has been bothering me since hour 3 of day 1 and I want to put on record why. The northern continent of this planet has a specific geological characteristic that our pre-contact survey catalogued as a minor note. The surface soil in a significant portion of the landmass is what the geological team described as deep clay loam with high mineral retention. What this means, in practical terms, is that the ground holds the shape of things. Footprints, pressure marks, track patterns. The ground holds them for a very long time, especially in the wet season, which we landed in. I have been walking through this ground for 4 days now, and I have been noticing, in the places where we walk, the shapes of previous walks. Old tracks. Heavy tracks, not our equipment, which leaves a different kind of impression. Something else. Many something elses. Long ago, this ground was walked by enormous things. I know the geological record. I know the planet's fauna history. I know what those tracks are from. But I kept noticing them, the way you notice something that's trying to tell you something without knowing how to say it yet. A planet that grew those things, and then survived them, and then grew these things. I wrote, day 4. Note re, geological record. Species emerges from environment. Environment selects for traits. Query, what specific pressures, sustained over what duration, produce what we are currently observing? I stopped there. Vreth found me crouched in the mud at hour 23, staring at an old track the size of my entire body. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, Cellos. Stop anthropomorphizing. 45, I said. He left. I stayed in the mud for another 20 minutes. Day 5. Hour 4. The Fleet Command sent a strategy update at hour 4 of day 5. Fleet Admiral Cathervath, the operation's namesake, an individual I have never met in person but whose decisions I have been documenting for 6 years, issued a revised operational assessment. The assessment acknowledged that initial projections had underestimated the tactical complexity of the ground campaign. It called for increased pressure on identified population centers and a more aggressive advance timetable. What it did not do, what it specifically, explicitly, formally declined to do, was revise the pacification window. 11 days. Still 11 days. I wrote, day 5. Fleet Command maintains 11-day window. Then, I wrote, we are on day 5. Then, I wrote, we have not taken a single sustained position. Then, I put my log away and went to find Vreth, because I needed to say something out loud to another person, and Vreth, for all his pinching and his anthropomorphizing tallies, is the person I trust on this ground. I found him in the command module. He was staring at the tactical display. The display showed our positions, our advance vectors, and the last known positions of human contact. The last known positions were mostly question marks. They filed an update, I said. I know. 11 days. I know. I looked at the tactical display for a while. Vreth. Don't. I'm not anthropomorphizing. I'm asking a military question. He turned. His second eyelid was very tight. On the 3 previous operations, I said. How many days did we spend before we had a stable position? Day 1, he said. All 3 times. I nodded. We didn't say anything else for a while. Then, I went back to my bunk and I opened my log and I wrote, day 5. We are in someone else's plan. I do not know how large the plan is. I do not know how far ahead it extends. I know that we are in it, and they put us here, and they have had a great deal of time to think about what happens next. I closed the log. Outside the command module, the northern continent mud sat in the dark and held its shapes. I am not sleeping well. This is on the record. I want it on the record. In 7 previous years of field documentation, I slept fine. I slept on 3 different alien planets in tents while fighting was happening within audible range, and I slept fine. I have slept through logistics disputes, through equipment failures, through the minor catastrophe of the fermented nutrient block incident, which kept 2 junior officers awake for 12 hours with digestive objections and kept me asleep entirely. I am not sleeping now. I keep thinking about the woman in the recording. Not her words. I've processed the words. I've cross-referenced the translations. I've accounted for idiom drift and syntactic loss and the general unreliability of machine translation when dealing with a language your team has had approximately 4 days to study. It's not the words. It's the pause. She paused before she said, "Take your time. We've got some." A deliberate, specific pause, the kind you put in front of a line that you've thought about, practiced, decided on. The kind of pause that says, "I want you to know I mean this." What I keep thinking about, in the dark of my bunk, listening to the perimeter sensors and the distant sounds of a planet that smells wrong, is the following: how long have they been planning this specific conversation? Day 6. Hour 9. The Runner. I have to tell you about the Runner. The 7th Scouting Element 8 Soldiers, Light Kit, Advanced Reconnaissance Tasking, was operating approximately 11 kilometers northwest of the main camp when they encountered a single human moving through open terrain. Open terrain. Not cover. Not concealment. A flat agricultural plain, stripped of its seasonal crop, offering nothing to hide behind and nothing to hide under. The human was running. Not running away. Running toward the 7th element's position. Full speed. Arms working. The kind of run that prioritizes velocity over everything else. The 7th element stopped. Their commander, a capable officer named Deathball who does not rattle easily, assessed the situation as lone human, no apparent weapon, running at us very fast in a straight line. She held the formation in place. The human ran to approximately 30 units from the 7th's forward position, then stopped. Hands out. The wait gesture, but both hands now, both palms up, urgent. Behind the human, appearing at the far edge of the agricultural plain, were 12 other humans. Not running. Walking. Fast, deliberate walking. Not toward the 7th element. Toward the single human. Deathfall's report describes what happened next with the precision of someone who has spent considerable time since then, trying to determine if what she saw was what she actually saw. The single human, still 30 units from the 7th's forward position, turned to face the 12 approaching humans. Positioned themselves between the 12 and the 7th element. And, then, Deathfall's words had a conversation. Not a surrender negotiation. Not an argument. A conversation. With gestures. Back and forth. It lasted 4 minutes. At the end of it, the 12 humans stopped walking. 2 of them appeared to argue. Then, they stopped arguing. Then, all 12 turned and walked back the way they had come. The single human turned back to the 7th element. Gave a single nod, not the wait gesture, something different, something the translation team later spent considerable effort on before landing on something between acknowledged and "this is handled," and then turned and jogged, not ran, away. The 7th element did not fire. Deathfall's call. She reported it as contact made, no hostile engagement, withdrew voluntarily. Analysis unknown. I interviewed Deathfall personally. I asked her what she thought had happened. She said, and I'm quoting directly into this log, "I think someone out there didn't want something to start yet, and that person ran very fast to make sure it didn't start." Then, she added, "That's just what it looked like." I wrote it down exactly. Day 6. Hour 17. The supply line problem. Our supply lines developed a problem on day 6. Not an attack. Not an ambush. A problem. The problem was that the supply convoy from landing zone Keth 7 to the 3rd column's forward position took, on day 1, approximately 2.5 hours. Reasonable, given terrain and vehicle capability. On day 2 it took 3 hours. On day 3, 4 hours. On day 4, which was when it became a reportable incident, 6 hours and 40 minutes. Same route. Same vehicles. Same drivers. The route, according to the drivers, was not the same. What the route had, on day 4, was things in it. Not obstructions, nothing you would classify as deliberate military obstruction. Just things. A fallen tree across the primary road, forcing a detour. Standing water in the detour, deeper than it looked, requiring a careful traverse. A soft verge on the recovery line from the standing water, requiring weight distribution management. A bridge on the secondary route that the engineering assessment had rated as structurally adequate for our vehicles turning out to be, on day 4, structurally adequate only if you went slowly and, one at a time. Each thing was a thing. Not a trap. Not a weapon. A thing. Taken individually, the logistics officer's assessment was, terrain challenges, manageable. Taken together, which is how I took them, the assessment was something else. I wrote, Day 6. Supply convoy, 6 hours 40 minutes. Query, what is the compound rate of delay increase over a sustained campaign period? Secondary query, who knows this terrain well enough to know exactly how much water makes a road take an extra hour? Path said it was coincidence. I like path less every day. Day 7. Hour 3. The list. I made a list. I do this sometimes when data is overwhelming my processing capacity and I need to put it in a form I can look at. I made a list of every observation from days 1 through 6 that, taken individually, was explainable. The list was very long. Then, I made a second list, observations that were explainable individually but shared a characteristic when grouped. The characteristic was, every single one of them cost us time. Not casualties. Not equipment. Not positions. Time. The perimeter breach cost us time rebuilding our security protocols, running verification sweeps, reassessing our defensive posture. The empty city cost us time searching, assessing, clearing, trying to determine if the emptiness was itself a trap. The day 4 contact cost us time with the disabled vehicles, cost us time reorienting the column's advance vector, cost us time filing the engagement report and waiting for fleet response. The supply delays. The runner. The recordings. The watchers in the vegetation. Every single one of them cost us time and gave us nothing to shoot back at. I stared at the list for a long while. Then, I wrote, Day 7. Working hypothesis, they are not trying to defeat us in the field. They are trying to make the field expensive. Query, what becomes expensive before it becomes untenable? I left the question there and went to find Vreth. Day 7. Hour 8. Vreth. Vreth was in the medical module when I found him. Not injured, just sitting in there, which is the kind of thing that happens to soldiers on operations that don't go the way they expected. The medical module is quiet. The medics are not tactical officers and don't ask tactical questions. I sat down across from him. I made a list, I said. Cellos. Time, I said. They're spending our time. He looked at me. His second eyelid was doing the pinching thing, but he wasn't saying the word. Not defeating us, I said. Not driving us off. Just making it cost. Every day. A little more. A little slower. A little less certain. Vreth said nothing. Because, I said, what's orbiting us right now? The fleet. The fleet, I said. Which has a resupply schedule. And a mandate duration. And a fleet admiral who told the Oversight Council that this operation would take 11 days. I could see him following it. Day 7, he said. Day 7, I said. And, we have not taken one sustained position. We have not reached a single primary objective. We have had no engagement we chose the terms of. And, every day it takes a little longer to get where we're going. Vreth stared at the medical module's wall. They can't beat the fleet, he said. It wasn't an argument. It was a man checking his own reasoning. They don't have to beat the fleet, I said. They have to outlast it. Make it cost more than it's worth. Make the Oversight Council look at the numbers, day 11, no objectives, escalating cost, no end state in sight, and ask whether 11 days was an optimistic estimate. Vreth was quiet for a long time. Then, the city. The city, I said. 400,000 people. Before we landed. Before we landed, I said. Which means they started moving before our first sensor tripped. Which means someone told them we were coming. Someone knew we were coming, I said. Long enough ahead to move 400,000 people so cleanly that orbital surveillance missed it. We sat in the medical module and listened to the planet outside. Vreth, I said. Don't. I need to send a revised assessment to Fleet Command. He closed his eyes. They won't like it, he said. No. The Admiral won't like it. No. It's going to make me look like I'm making excuses for a ground campaign that's behind schedule. Vreth. What? Would you rather be the officer who sent the warning, or the one who didn't? He opened his eyes. He looked at me for a long time. Write it, he said. Be accurate. Don't editorialize. I went back to my bunk and I wrote the most precise, most carefully documented, most systematically supported assessment I have produced in 9 years of field recording. I submitted it at hour 11. Fleet Command acknowledged receipt at hour 14 and issued no response. Day 7. Hour 20. The human with the radio. The 7th Scouting Element found the relay station. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I think the description matters. A relay station, in the context of this planet's communications infrastructure, is a tower, tall, latticed, bolted together from the planet's native metals that amplifies and retransmits communications signals across distances. The planet had a great many of them. We knew this from orbital surveys. We had identified them as secondary infrastructure, useful to take but not priority. The 7th found one that was still operational. And they found a human at the base of it. The human was not hiding. This is the detail I return to. The 7th came through a line of trees, established visual on the relay station, and the human was just there. Sitting at the base of the tower. On the ground. With a piece of equipment in their lap, talking into it. Deathfall's account, we challenged. They looked at us. Held up one finger. Kept talking. One finger. One moment. I'm finishing something. Deathfall does not rattle easily. She rattled slightly. She held the formation. The human finished talking. Took approximately 30 seconds to complete whatever they were completing. Then, set down the equipment, stood, and faced the 7th element with both hands visible and empty. No weapon. Deathball advanced. The human allowed it. Allowed the restraint. Allowed the translation device to be used. Deathball asked, through the translation device, what the human was doing. The translation rendering of the response was finishing. It's done now. Deathball asked, what is done? The human said, and this is the translation team's rendering, accuracy rated moderate, something that translates approximately as, the part 1 was responsible for. Then, the human sat back down on the ground, crossed their legs, and appeared to have no further objections to being there. The relay station, when the engineers got to it, had been transmitting for approximately 6 hours before the 7th's arrival. In compressed, fragmented, rapidly shifting signal patterns that our communications team spent the rest of Day 7 and most of Day 8 trying to decode. They didn't decode it. The signals were, according to our communications lead, not coded in any conventional encryption format. They were something else, something that looked, to our analysis systems, like random noise until you looked at it from a specific angle, and then, it looked like it might not be random but you couldn't prove it. I wrote, Day 7. Human at relay station. Finished transmission before capture. Query, who were they talking to? Secondary query, how many relay stations are still operational that we haven't found? Peth said, if they're just talking to each other, it doesn't matter what they're saying. They can't do anything with information that changes our material advantage. I wrote that down too. Day 8. Hour 6. What Peth doesn't understand. I want to talk about what Peth doesn't understand, because I think it's important and I think it explains the failure mode that I'm watching develop in real time. Peth is not an unintelligent officer. Peth is, in fact, quite capable in the domains Peth has been trained for. Logistics, resource allocation, supply chain management. In those areas, Peth is excellent. What Peth doesn't understand is narrative. What I mean by narrative is the story that a conflict tells about itself. Not the facts of the conflict. The meaning of the facts as they accumulate. Specifically, the meaning of the facts as they are being observed by the Fleet Command watching from orbit, and by the Oversight Council receiving reports, and by whatever political and economic apparatus decided this operation was worth funding. Peth sees our material advantage and concludes that material advantage equals inevitable outcome. What Peth doesn't account for is that the humans are not trying to defeat our material advantage. They are trying to defeat the story that our material advantage tells. The story that says, this will be quick, this will be clean, this is worth the cost. Every day that story looks a little different. Every day the numbers change a little more. And, on day 8 I checked, the operation was 3 days past its projected completion date and had achieved none of its stated primary objectives. That's a story too. Day 8. Hour 15. The injured soldier. One of our soldiers was injured in a contact skirmish near the forest perimeter. Minor injury, I want to be clear about that. A laceration to the lower secondary limb from a debris impact. Not life-threatening. The soldier was walking within 2 hours and back to full duty status by hour 20. This is not about the injury. This is about what happened while the soldier was being attended to by our field medics, at the edge of the forest perimeter, in the space between the skirmish position and the camp boundary. A human appeared. One human. No weapon visible. Walked to the edge of the forest, not into the open, just to the edge, and watched. The medics kept working. The soldier noticed the human and reached for a sidearm. The medic attending stopped the soldier's hand without looking up from the wound. The human watched for approximately 4 minutes. Then, it produced something from the equipment pack it carried, a small container, and set it on the ground at the forest's edge. Then, it stepped back into the trees and was gone. The container turned out to be a medical compound of local manufacture. Our medics identified it as an effective antiseptic with some analgesic properties. I want to be clear, the medic attending had already addressed the wound appropriately with our own supplies. The human's offering was not necessary. The medic took it anyway. Used it. Said, when I interviewed them, that it seemed rude not to. I wrote, day 8. Human observed an injury, returned with treatment. No tactical context. No apparent strategic value. Then, I wrote, unless the strategic value is that the medic took it. Then, I wrote, unless the strategic value is something we don't have a word for in military reporting. I sat with that for a while. Day 8. Hour 23. The message. Vreth called me to the command module at hour 23. He was standing in front of the communications terminal. On the terminal was a received signal, narrow band, direct transmission to our primary array, addressed, in our own numeric notation, to Recording Officer Cello's 14th Forward Assessment Unit. It was addressed to me. Vreth stepped aside. I sat down. The message was audio. No translation required, it had been translated, carefully and precisely, into a language our systems could render directly. Someone had worked to make sure I understood it. The voice was the same as the recording in the empty city. She said, I read your assessment. The one you sent to Fleet Command. Pause. You're right about the time. We noticed the same thing from our end. Another pause. Shorter. Tell the Admiral that 11 days was always going to be wrong. Not because of us. Because of the math. Then, quieter, you seem like someone who's going to keeping accurate records. That matters, in the long run. A longer pause. Long run's the thing, isn't it? The transmission ended. I sat in front of the terminal for a while. Then, I turned to Vreth and I said, she read my assessment. I see that. Which means she has access to our communications. I see that. Which means she's had access to our communications possibly since the beginning. Vreth said nothing. Since before we landed, I said. She knew we were coming because she could hear us coming. The room was very quiet. Vreth, I said. How much of what we've done have they known about in advance? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We were both looking at the same math. I wrote, Day 8. Hour 23. Working hypothesis revised upward, they have been reading our operational planning. The 11-day estimate, the advance vectors, the supply routes, the column assignments. All of it. I paused. They have been letting us execute a plan they could see the entirety of. And they have been responding, not to what we're doing, but to what we're going to do. I closed the log. Outside, the planet's second moon was rising over the valley, and the mud held all its shapes in the dark, patient and exact. I stopped counting Vreth's anthropomorphizing tallies on day 8. Not because he stopped. He said it twice yesterday. But the thing about the tally was that it was a joke, the kind of joke you make to manage a situation that isn't quite threatening yet, to make the unfamiliar feel smaller by making it funny. The tally was my way of telling myself, this is catalogable, this is manageable, this is something I can put numbers on. I don't feel that way anymore. What I feel, what I want to be honest about in this log, because I have committed to accuracy and I will maintain that commitment is something that doesn't fit neatly into my reporting vocabulary. I feel like we made an error in calculation. Not a small one. Not an arithmetic slip. A foundational one. The kind that happens when you're solving the right equation in the wrong room. We modeled this campaign as, we arrive, we apply pressure, resistance collapses, we establish control. That model requires the defending population to be, at the moment of contact, already at their maximum organizational capacity. No room to grow. No reserves. No infrastructure that isn't already visible to orbital surveillance. What we did not model was a population that had been specifically, systematically, deliberately preparing for exactly this scenario. Not for years. Not even for decades. The relay station human said, the Part 1 was responsible for. The empty city was moving before we landed. The woman in the recording knew, specifically and precisely, what was in my assessment. I wrote, Day 9. Query, what is the minimum preparation time to move 400,000 people, reorganize communications infrastructure, brief a sufficient portion of the population on operational protocol to enable coordinated response, and develop intelligence access to an incoming military force's communication systems, all without leaving detectable evidence? I wrote, this is not a question I can answer. I wrote, I think that's deliberate. Day 9. Hour 7. The third column's second contact. Ver filed a contact report at hour 7. The third column had encountered a human unit again, larger this time, estimated 60 to 80 individuals in a position approximately 2 kilometers east of their forward camp. Different terrain than the day 4 contact, open hillside, sparse cover, the kind of ground that should favor a well-armed, technologically superior force. It did not favor us. What Ver's report described, carefully, precisely, with the tone of a man who has been thinking very hard about how to write this without it sounding the way it sounds, was approximately this: the human unit had fortified the hillside. Not with sophisticated engineering. With the hillside itself. They had used the terrain's existing features, gullies, ridgelines, stand formations of the local vegetation, to construct what Ver's lead engineer described as a defensive arrangement of remarkable economy. Minimum material. Maximum coverage. The kind of position that takes a great deal of knowledge and very little equipment. The third column engaged. Ver committed 2 full strike elements, heavy mount support, and close air asset tasking. The human unit held the position for 4.5 hours. Then, withdrew. Organized, covered, staged withdrawal, one segment holding while another moved, then, the reverse, pulling back through terrain they had clearly pre-mapped. Ver's casualty report: 2 soldiers with significant injuries. 11 with minor injuries. 3 vehicles with systems damage. Human unit casualties, unknown. Ver estimated, based on physical evidence at the abandoned position, somewhere between 3 and 7 individuals. But, the numbers, as I have been trying to articulate for 8 days, are not the point. The point, the thing that Ver put at the end of his report, in a single sentence that I suspect took him a very long time to write, was this: they withdrew before we broke them. Not because they were broken. Not because we had achieved fire superiority. Not because any material calculation forced the withdrawal. They withdrew because they chose to. They had held long enough for whatever they needed the hold to accomplish. Then, they left. I wrote, Day 9. Third column contact. Human unit engaged on chosen ground for chosen duration, then, withdrew on own terms. Every engagement in this campaign has been on their terms. Query: have we made a single move they didn't account for? Then, secondary query: are they letting us ask that question? Does the question serve them? I stopped writing for a while. Day 9. Hour 14. Death Vol. I went to find Deathfall because I wanted to talk to someone who'd actually been close to them. Deathfall was running maintenance checks on the 7th Elements kit when I found her, the kind of systematic, hands-on work that experienced soldiers do when they need to think without appearing to think. She didn't look up when I sat down across from her. The runner, I said. She kept working. Day 6. You said someone didn't want something to start yet. That's what it looked like. What do you think now? I said. 9 days in. Deathfall set down the component she was working on. She looked at me with the expression of a person deciding whether to say something true. I think, she said, slowly, that the runner was not an individual making a personal decision. She picked the component back up. I think, she said, that the runner was supposed to be there. In that place. At that time. To do that specific thing. To stop a premature engagement. To stop something starting before it was time for it to start. I wrote that down. In my head, which is where I store things before they go in the log. Deathfall, I said. The human at the relay station. The one who finished their transmission before you could stop them. Yes. You said they held up one finger. One moment. Yes. When they finished, I said. Did they seem, I thought about how to ask this. Did they seem like something had gone wrong? Like they hadn't had enough time? Or did they seem like they were done, she said. Yes. They were done, she said. Completely done. Whatever they were transmitting, they transmitted all of it, and, when they put down the equipment it was because there was nothing left to transmit. She went back to the maintenance. We got there exactly late enough, she said. Not a minute more. I stood up. Death Vol. Don't ask me what I think it means. I wasn't going to, I said. I already know what it means. Day 9. Hour 21. Fleet Command Response. Fleet Command responded to my Day 7 assessment at hour 21 of Day 9. The response was from the Admiral's office, not the Admiral directly, which is either a sign of disinterest or a sign that the Admiral is occupied with something larger. The response did not engage with any of my specific analytical points. It acknowledged receipt, noted that my assessment would be filed, and directed the 14th FAU to continue operational documentation. Then, it said, revised operational timeline, 14 days. Objectives remain unchanged. I read that 3 times. 14 days. We were on day 9 with no sustained positions and a defending population that had read our plans, moved 400,000 people ahead of our arrival, and was conducting a systematic campaign of time cost escalation that was, by my estimate, operating precisely on schedule. 14 days. I wrote, day 9. Fleet Command revises window to 14 days. 11 days of actual operation has produced 0 primary objectives achieved, 0 sustained positions established, all engagement terms set by defending force, communication security compromised from an unknown date. Fleet Command response to comprehensive analytical assessment, add 3 days. I closed the log. Then, I opened it again. Note, I have been a recording officer for 9 years. I have documented 3 planetary operations. I have never filed an assessment that recommended withdrawal. I am not recommending withdrawal. I am documenting, with as much precision as I can manage, the following observation: we are not losing this campaign in any conventional military sense. We retain material and technological superiority. We can sustain this operation indefinitely from a resource standpoint. We are losing the story. And, the people we are fighting, if fighting is the right word for what they are doing, which I am increasingly uncertain about, have understood, from before we arrived, that the story is the campaign. Day 10. Hour 3. The human in the camp. I need to tell you about the human in the camp. Day 10, Hour 3. The camp was in its quiet period, reduced staffing, sensor coverage active, standard overnight posture. I was awake because I was not sleeping and had stopped pretending I was going to. I was in the secondary records module, a smaller space off the main command module where the documentation terminals are working on filing organization. In 9 years I have never done records filing at hour 3. I was doing it at hour 3 because it was something to do with my hands while my mind ran its circuits. I heard something. Not an alarm. Not a system alert. A sound, the specific sound of a weight shifting on the module's outer composite, which is a sound I know because the composite responds to temperature fluctuation and does it loudly, and I've been listening to it every night for 10 nights. This was different from temperature fluctuation. This was pressure. Something sitting on the roof. I did not call an alert. I don't know exactly why. I sat very still and listened. For approximately 12 minutes, I watched the terminal clock. There was the occasional small sound of weight on the composite. Then, nothing. Then, a different sound, the specific creak of the access panel on the secondary module's eastern face, which is technically sealed but has a seal quality I have complained about in maintenance requests, and those requests have been pending for a while. The panel opened. A human came through it. I want to describe what I observed as precisely as possible, because this is the observation I have gone over more times than any other in 10 days. The human was, I placed the individual as a mature adult, upper end of working age, from the physical markers I had by then, accumulated sufficient comparative data to read reasonably well. Small. Lighter than most of the humans we'd encountered in field contacts. Moving with the practiced economy of someone who had been moving quietly through spaces for a long time. The human looked at me. I looked at the human. We had approximately 2 seconds of looking at each other. Then, the human glanced at my documentation terminal. At the open log. At the records filing I had been doing at hour 3. And then, this is the part I've gone over and over, the part that lives in the corner of every hour since, the human smiled. Not a smile that said I have you. Not a smile that said you should be afraid. A smile that said, very specifically, something I had no category for in my reporting vocabulary. Something I'd been turning over in my head for days. Something that felt, in the moment, like recognition. Then, the human put one hand flat on the documentation terminal, a deliberate, brief touch, and turned and went back through the access panel. The panel closed. I sat in the secondary records module for 4 minutes before I did anything. Then, I checked the terminal. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been altered. Nothing had been added. Just the touch. I wrote, Day 10, Hour 3. Unauthorized individual accessed secondary records module. no material taken or damaged. Duration of contact, approximately 90 seconds. Intent, unknown. I sat there for a while longer. Amendment, intent classified as unknown. However, I stopped. Then, I wrote, they know we're documenting this. They came to see the documentation. Then, I wrote the thing I've been building toward for 10 days, the thing I've been circling and, noting and, appending and, implying without saying directly, they are not fighting this campaign to win the ground. They are fighting this campaign to be on the record correctly. Every contact, every delay, every withdrawal on their terms, every message addressed to me specifically, they are building a record. The same record I am building. And, they came to this module at hour 3 to make sure I knew it. This is not a military assessment. This is a documentation of what it felt like. What it felt like was being understood by something that has been in the room longer than you. Day 11. Hour 0. The last contact. The operation's 11th day, the original projected completion date, the date that had been revised once already and, would, I was almost certain, be revised again, arrived with the particular quality of a deadline that has been watching you approach it with great patience. The human with the radio was released from custody at hour 0 of day 11. Vretha's decision. He told me after. I asked why. He said, because keeping them wasn't doing anything. And, something about it was wrong. I wrote that down. The human was escorted to the camp's perimeter and released. At the perimeter, the human paused, turned, and said something. Our translation coverage at that position was partial, we got fragments. What the fragments amounted to, in the translation team's best reconstruction, was something like, most of you are decent. I want that in your record too. Then, the human walked away. Into the valley. Into the mud. Gone. Day 11. Hour 9. The Admiral. Fleet Admiral Cathervath communicated directly with the ground command at hour 9. I was present. I am always present. The Admiral was, in the visual communication format, exactly what an admiral looks like, composed, authoritative, the particular kind of calm that comes from being very far away from the difficulty. The Admiral reviewed the position reports. The casualty tallies, our casualties were, objectively, low. The Admiral reviewed the supply status, the vehicle status, the communications intercept status. All manageable. All within tolerances. Then, the Admiral said, what is the current assessment of total remaining resistance capacity? Vreth said, unknown. The Admiral said, estimate. Vreth said, I am unable to provide a reliable estimate. Pause. Elaborate, Subcommander. Vreth said, and, I want this exact in the record, because Vreth is not a man who says things carelessly. My assessment is that we have not seen a significant proportion of their available capacity. What we have encountered represents a fraction of what is there. The fraction has been specifically calibrated to achieve specific results without revealing the remainder. The Admiral was quiet. What results? The Admiral said. Time, Vreth said. Cost. Position. Another pause. Sub-Commander. We have material and numerical superiority. Yes, Admiral. We can maintain this operation indefinitely. Yes, Admiral. Then, what is the strategic problem? Vreth glanced at me. I looked at him. I gave him the smallest nod I could produce. He turned back to the visual display. The strategic problem, Vreth said, carefully, is that we are on day 11. We have no objectives. We have no end state in sight. And, we are fighting a population that has read all of our plans, moved all of their vulnerable people, compromised our communications, and, has not to my knowledge, made a single error. Pause. They are not trying to defeat us, Admiral. They are trying to make us look at the math. Silence on the line. What math? The Admiral said. Vreth said, the math that asks what this is worth. Day 12. Hour 0. After. I'm going to tell you what happened next. Not the operational details. Not the orders that came down at hour 14, or the fleet reassessment that followed, or the extended timeline that no one believed and everyone recited. Not the political content of the Oversight Council's response to the Admiral's revised projections, which was filed through channels I don't have direct access to but, which the Admiral's communications officer summarized to Vreth as significant displeasure. I'm going to tell you what happened to me. At hour 0 of day 12, I went out to the perimeter. Not for any operational reason. Just to stand in the dark and think. The valley was quiet. The planet's second moon was down and the first was thin and more dark than light. The mud was the same mud it had always been. The vegetation did the thing it does, which is move slightly in ways the wind doesn't account for. I stood there for a while. Then, I opened my log. Not the official operational log. The personal one I keep alongside it, the one I've been feeding fragments into for 12 days, the one that contains all the things I can't put in the official record because they don't fit the format of military observation. I wrote, Day 12. Personal. I have documented 3 planetary subjugations. In each of them, there was a moment early, before the outcome was settled, where the defending population situation became clear to me as an observer. A moment where I could see the shape of what was going to happen. And, the shape was always the same: compression, resistance, collapse. I have been waiting for that moment on this planet for 12 days. It hasn't come. I don't think it's coming. Not because they are stronger. Not because they have better weapons or superior numbers. They don't. We have all of those things and they know it, and they have, by my assessment, structured their entire response around the assumption that we have all of those things. The thing I keep returning to, the thing from the secondary records module, hour 3, day 10, is the smile. In the smile was something I don't have a word for. I've been going through my vocabulary for 12 days and I don't have a word for it. The closest I can get is the smile of something that has been doing this for a very long time. Not this specific thing, not this campaign, not this contact. Something older. The thing underneath the campaign. The persistent thing. The thing that moves 400,000 people before the sensors trip. The thing that reads the operational plans before the boots touch the ground. The thing that sends one person running across an open field to make sure nothing starts before it's time. The thing that put a medical compound at the edge of the forest for a soldier it had no strategic reason to help. I don't know what to call that. I know what it looked like. It looked like a species that has broken itself against very hard things before and learned, from the breaking, exactly how to be. I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to keep this log accurate. I think that matters. I think they think it matters too. That's the part one haven't been able to explain to Fleet Command. You can't put it in a casualty count or a position report. You can't quantify it. They are fighting, if that's even the word, in a register that our reporting formats don't have a column for. And they have been patient about it. Patient in a way that tells you patience is not a strategy they adopted. It is a thing they became. Day 12. Hour 0. I don't know how this ends. I don't think that matters to them at all. I closed the log. Around me, the planet breathed in the dark, humid, organic, faintly wrong-smelling in the specific way I'd stopped noticing somewhere around day 5 and had started noticing again tonight, as if the smell had always been trying to tell me something and had decided, finally, that I was ready to hear it. I don't know what it was saying. I stayed at the perimeter for a long time. Recording Officer Sellos, 14th Forward Assessment Unit, Keth Expeditionary Force. Log continued under separate filing. Operational assessment status, ongoing.